David Ottaway is a fellow with the Wilson Center's Middle East program and a former Washington Post correspondent. He's also the author of this new book, The Arab World Upended, Revolution and its Aftermath in Tunisia and Egypt. David, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I'm always interested in the sausage-making process. Tell us, was this book inspired by the outbreak of the Arab Spring, or is this something
It
you've
certainly
been working on?
was. It certainly was. But I've been long interested in revolutions from, I guess, the time I studied in France in 1960 when the struggle for independence in Algeria was underway, and there was tremendous turmoil in Paris and strikes and everything. And of course, I was studying French history and got fascinated with the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And then when I went to college at Harvard, one of my professors was Crane Brinton, who had written this wonderful book called Anatomy of Revolution, which was the study of the American, the English, the French, and the Russian revolutions. And he found they go through cycles, stages.
Uh-huh.
And I began to see these stages in Tunisia and Egypt. So
right out of the textbook.
Well, I mean, right out of the text, he talks about a honeymoon period, a struggle between moderates and extremists, and like the Robespierres that come to power.
Uh-huh.
Then the Thermidor reaction. Nobody can stand this, the lifestyle of, the reign of he called it the reign of virtue. And then there's a reaction to that. Then you have a restoration, and they end up in dictatorships, and this really stuck in my mind because everybody thought the Arab uprisings of 2011 were the beginning of a transition to democracy. But in fact, most of the revolutions of the 19th century and the 20th century, and even the 18th century, take the French Revolution, they ended in Napoleons and Cromwells and Stalins, and they didn't end in democracies. And as I saw the Islamists being kicked out of power in both Tunisia and Egypt, and then the restoration, strongman, el-Sisi coming in, it was exactly
followed the pattern.
It followed the pattern, and that really got me fascinated.
The reasons for the uprisings are they roughly equivalent in both Tunisia and Egypt, or are there any notable differences?
Well, what's equivalent is that they were the revolutionaries were fed up with strong men running the country, who they saw as corrupt and repressive, and so they were all in both cases rising up against dictators. So that's the similarity between the two.
And then the outcomes today in both countries. Why do we see a difference in outcomes?
Totally different. I mean, Sisi follows the Crane Britons and the cycle you go through, and you end up with much of a restoration from the old system and a strong man.
Yeah.
Tunisia is quite unique for a number of reasons. First of all, the Islamists only won 37% of the vote in the elections in 2011 and 2012. So they had to, right from the beginning, form coalitions with secular parties, and that put an enormous brake on what they could do and what they could force through in terms of what was going to be in the Constitution. Secondly, there was a very weak army. There always has been a very small, only about 35,000 soldiers, and in Tunisia. So the army has stayed apolitical throughout the history of Tunisia since its independence in 1956. And they didn't play any role in the uprising. In fact, the military refused to help keep in power Ben Ali. They just remained neutral and therefore
they just sat it out.
Yeah. So that was important. Another very important factor is that Tunisia has very strong, as it turns out, civil society groups, in particular the labor unions. And the labor unions were also opposed to the Islamic rule in Tunisia and the Islamic Party in Nada. So they acted as a brake on what the Islamists could do in Tunisia. But you had a diffusion of power among various groups in Tunisia that we have seen nowhere else in all these uprisings or any of the Arab countries. And a very strong labor union, which Tunisia is the only country where the labor unions really play a very strong role in the economy, and they have a strong bargaining power. They're independent, particularly since the uprising. So those are just some of the, and then finally the leadership. Rashid Ghannouchi, the Islamic leader of Tunisia, is a really smart guy. And his role was to make compromises with the secularists over the constitution and keep his own hotheads under control. So he played an extremely important role just because he's a very smart person, which we didn't see with anything that happened with Morsi, Mohammed Morsi, the Islamic president, the Brotherhood president who came to power in Egypt. So there are a lot of differences.
Yeah, you have a whole chapter on post-revolution prospects, and I wonder, it didn't stop at Napoleon, right? These are never endpoints. It's just stages and ages along a continuum.
Exactly.
So what are we looking at as far as the trend lines?
Well, we're looking at a lot of economic difficulties in both countries, and particularly in Egypt, where they've just let the pound float, and the value of the pound has been cut in half, and you have 30% inflation in this January. They broke loose. They let the pound go loose in November, and now it just goes up and up and up, and so the cost of living for Egyptians has skyrocketed. There's a lot of discontent, and the government is aware of this and is sort of arresting anybody and stopping any signs of demonstrations and trying to keep control while they go through this really difficult period. Lots of strikes, a lot of strikes in Tunisia, but also a lot of, after 4 years of really difficult sort of tumultuous times, a lot of Tunisians, a lot of Egyptians are not ready, I don't think, yet, to go out on the street and, force the issue against the government and have another uprising. I don't think they're there yet.
When you say yet, I attended the book event here at the Wilson Center yesterday.
Yeah.
When you were on a panel with Henri Barkey and Robin Wright. And one of the provocative questions that was discussed was this the real revolution, or are we still waiting for that? What do you think?
I think they were real revolutions. Not only the scope and size of them, hundreds of thousands of Tunisians and Egyptians marching in the street, but what came out of this, particularly in Tunisia, is a new ruling class. The Islamists are now embedded as part of the ruling elite of Tunisia. Now, this is not true in Egypt, where they've really suppressed the Brotherhood and arrested, 40,000 of them in jail, probably. But what's true in both places as a result of what happened, and Crane Britton talks about this, is the revolutionary tradition that revolutions create in the history and the political culture of the countries. And this revolutionary tradition is now very much a part of the political.
The seeds have been planted.
Seeds have been planted. Mm-hmm. And the new rulers know this, and the leftists and the ones who want to protest are aware of this. Now, how they're going to get the momentum going again to have another uprising, you can't, nobody knew how it was going to happen the first time, and now,
Right.
We'll see how it happens.
Well, one of the great...
But the tradition is there.
The tradition is now in place. One of the great stories of our times, and as usual, your reporting is top-notch, and you get to go so much deeper writing books than when you were in the newspaper business.
Exactly.
Right? Is there another book in the making? Are you going to keep tracking this
Yes,
story?
with Marina, my wife, we have another book coming out.
Well, thanks for the ongoing great work, David. Good luck with the book.
Thank you. Right.